Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating concept, one that's absolutely key to understanding the Japanese spirit. We're talking about the art of the pause and a powerful idea called ma. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone from Japan and there's a pause, a moment of silence that doesn't feel awkward, but actually feels like it's full of meaning? Or maybe you've had that feeling where what isn't being said seems way more important than the actual words coming out? It gets you thinking, right? Well, it turns out there's an answer to all of this. It all comes back to one single, incredibly powerful idea that's woven right into the fabric of Japanese society. Okay, let's get into it. First up, we're going to explore what you might call the unspoken code. You know, when people talk about the Japanese personality, there are a few things that almost always come up. You hear about a group-first mentality, the use of indirect expressions, a real effort to avoid direct conflict, a high value placed on modesty, and this general air of diligence and seriousness. But here's the million-dollar question. Are these just a bunch of random cultural habits? Or is there some kind of master key, a single idea that connects every single one of them? Well, you guessed it, there is. And that brings us to the star of our show today, the concept of ma. Let's break down what this really means. So, what in the world is ma? Well, the character itself, man, can mean things like space or gap. But culturally, it's so much bigger than that. This isn't about empty space. Think of it as a meaningful interval. It's a pause in time, or a space in a relationship that's intentionally created and filled with feeling, energy, and unspoken understanding. And this is where it gets really interesting, especially when you compare it to a more Western point of view. In many cultures, a pause in conversation is seen as empty space, right? It's an awkward silence, a vacuum that needs to be filled immediately. But from the perspective of ma, that exact same pause is a conscious choice. It's a space you create to build harmony and show consideration. Okay, so that's the theory, but how does this actually play out in a real conversation? Well, it fundamentally changes how people communicate. This is what we mean by speaking in the spaces. This breaks it down perfectly. So imagine you ask someone a very direct question. In a culture shaped by ma, the first instinct isn't to just blurt out an answer. Step one is to pause and consider the other person's feelings. That's creating ma. Then, to keep the harmony, you'll probably avoid a blunt no. The result? You get a more ambiguous reply, one that leaves room for interpretation and, most importantly, protects the relationship. There's a quote from the source material that just nails this idea. It says these ambiguous expressions and the tendency to not jump to conclusions, it's all a direct result of being conscious of ma, and it's all done out of consideration for other people. It's not about being evasive, it's about being respectful. And, this whole concept isn't just for one-on-one chats. It actually scales up to shape the entire social structure. This is where we see the harmony of the group. So remember that list of personality traits from the beginning? The group-first mentality, the consideration for others, the modesty and diligence? Now, looking at them through the lens of ma, they start to make perfect sense. They aren't random. They're all different ways of creating and respecting that meaningful social space. So here's the big takeaway here. These aren't just separate characteristics you can check off a list. They're all deeply connected. They're basically just different ways of putting the principle of ma into practice in real-life social situations, all to keep the peace and show respect. This is so important, in fact, that a researcher named Yukio Uchinuma actually pinpointed when our awareness of ma is at its peak. He called these moments intermediate situations. Basically, it's any time our self-consciousness and our awareness of others are cranked up to the max. In those moments, the need to create ma becomes absolutely crucial. But here's the thing. Ma isn't just a social tool or a rule book for being polite. It goes so much deeper than that, right into the cultural and aesthetic soul of Japan. It's a whole different level of sensibility. I mean, this idea goes way, way back. It's been a core part of Japanese aesthetics for centuries. In art, architecture, even theater. Some historians even suggest that its role in keeping social harmony was really cemented back in the Edo period. And of course, today, it continues to shape everything from everyday conversation to modern design. So when you boil it all down, ma is so much more than a social custom. It's this deep, almost artistic appreciation for the beauty, the tension, and the real meaning that you find, not in the things themselves, but in the space between them. And that leaves us with a big question to chew on. Maki is this powerful, meaningful space that shapes so much of Japanese culture. So what about your own culture? What's the meaningful space, the unspoken rule, the shared understanding, the powerful pause that shapes the world you live in? Something to think about.